let's start. So now we will have a very special kind of event. This is the second time we're having such kind of format event in our Ukrainian Investment Forum. This is called Future of Finance Talks. This is a TEDx-style speeches that will be presented by our CFA charter holders, CFA candidates, and just our volunteers, who will try to introduce their thoughts on different topics linked to the future of finance, on how they are seeing such kind of future. And we have a very exclusive prize for the winner of this Future of Finance Talks, of this competition. The prize is a trip to the CFA annual conference that will be held in May 2018 in Hong Kong. Annual conference of CFA Institute is a high-notch, top-level event in the global community, attended by more than 1,000 of top-level investors, investment bankers, and of course CFA charter holders, where people get together all over the world to discuss the most vital problems of the global economy. So this is really a high-level kind of a prize that we are willing to present to the winner of today's Future of Finance Talks. And I'm happy to tell that today we will have 4 participants in our talks. And you, as our highly esteemed audience, will be voting for the winner of these talks. So please listen carefully to what our speakers will be presented. And in the end, after the 4th speech, we will have a voting. We will ask you to cast your vote to find out who will be the winner of the Future of Finance. And now I would like to pass the stage to the first speaker of our competition. It's Konstantin Fastovets, who will present on the topic, the value of emerging markets investment research. Please welcome Konstantin.
The slides, yeah, okay. Hello, my name is Konstantin, and I'm a fixed income analyst based here in Kiev. I've done quite a bit of equity research in the past as well. And the talk here, the value of emerging markets and investment research, is very tightly connected to my work. And I think I'd like to, the way it's connected to the future of finance is I think that the future of investment research is really in emerging markets. So I'd like to begin by splitting up investments into 2 groups, and this is passive investment and active investment. And as many of you know, passive investment is simply investing in an index and sort of waiting for it to grow, and active investment is your typical type of investment where you pick and choose assets, options, or fixed income instruments, and then you readjust your portfolio based on what your thoughts are. This may be a surprise to some of you, but it turns out that passive investment is actually a very viable option, and this has been the case over the past decades on developed markets. And I got a chart here for you to look at where you can see that this is a study done in 2002 that shows the percentage of funds, of active funds that have outperformed the MSCI Europe Index, and you can see that it's only 16%. Now, you may say this has been a long time ago, this is just one study, but look at data from the S&P, and this is from today, basically. This is June 30, where the share of funds that actively invest that have underperformed their benchmarks, and this would be for large cap equity, this would be something like the S&P large cap, is staggering. It's 80% in some cases, and that sort of creates a conundrum for investment analysts and for investors generally, because if you can just invest in an index, why should you care about investing actively? Now, and generally, this is also connected to the value of research as such, because if there's no value, right, if you can just buy an index, what is the value of your investment decisions? Now, does this apply to emerging markets? I'd like to argue that it doesn't, and the reason that it doesn't is because in order for you to have the ability to passively invest, you have to have a sufficient number of market participants. And if you look at something like Apple, for example, a stock that's really widely traded on the US exchange, you can just look at the sell side, and only from the sell side you have something like 50 analysts analyzing this very transparent company. And the buy side has just as many people doing it, so you have hundreds of people analyzing one company on those markets, and then you have thousands of investors competing for it and investing at the very same time. What you have in emerging markets is something completely different, right? If you look at Ukraine, for example, or really any other really emerging market, you can see that there's just a very few people that actually study these things, very few people that invest, and a consensus isn't there simply. So you can't just buy an index, and an index, even if you built an index, the chances that it's going to be mispriced are really, really high. So there you can see that if there's no way to invest passively, that's exactly where investment analysis comes in place and where it can add a lot of value. Another sort of way to look at this, and that I have a chart, a diagram on the right here, is that emerging markets are characterized by really high risk and really high return. So if you assume that investment research can lower or cut down on that risk, you can see there's just simply a lot more room for that risk to be cut down. And in this regard, you can see that if you can cut down even 20% of the risk, for example, right, in both developed markets and emerging markets, the amount of value that you're going to derive from that is simply much higher in emerging economies. And I'd like to also give a practical example of this, and this is very tightly connected to Ukraine, and this is my experience that I think demonstrates this pretty clearly, is that in markets like Ukraine, you don't really need to have you don't need to do that much analytical work in order to derive really meaningful insights. And the example that I'm going to give here is the bail-in of Privatbank's bonds at the beginning of 2017. Just very quickly, I'd like to list a few insights that I think could have been very helpful for a lot of investors that invested in these bonds. Now, as you know, these were bailed in. They're currently valued at about 30% of their par value on the market, and a lot of investors were surprised by this. Why did this happen? You know, they thought that the probability of this event was going to be very low, and I think that a very simple analytical process could have led them to avoid this kind of loss. Now, so the three insights that I have here, some pretty simple ones, is that if you look at Privatbank compared to all the top 5 banks in the system, you can see that the share of provisions to gross loans for Privatbank was always very low, right? It's staggeringly low, and this sort of hints at the fact that that the Privatbank had a problem with capital. Now, you could say that it's been audited by the Big Four, so the numbers that they're providing must be correct. And this is insight number 2, that in Ukraine, Big Four audits don't mean the same thing they do in the West. And if you've been in this country long enough, you probably heard of Maria, for example, right, which was also audited by the Big Four, and they pretty much doubled their assets, and they got away with it. So this is insight number 2, and that's sort of your bearing on the ground. And then finally, I think one of the most important insights here, and this is what confused a lot of people, is that they thought, Privatbank it's too big to fail. The government is just going to step in and save it, and investors are going to be, cheerful, happy, and they're going to keep their bonds. But in order to bust this myth, all you had to do was look at the IMF document for Ukraine, and this is the #1 document you should be looking at if you're looking at Ukraine from an external angle. And it said pretty plainly there that the public funds are going to be injected into a bank only after shareholders have been completely diluted, and all non-deposit unsecured creditors are going to be bailed in. So it was there for a very long time, and as you can see, this kind of analysis, just knowing where to look for information, is sufficient for you to have a really meaningful impact on your investment decisions. So I think the future of finance lies in emerging markets, and I think analysts should be paying more attention to this kind of work. Thank you very much.
Anastasiia Medianovska with the topic Corporate Governance as a Mindset. Nastya, please come.
Good morning to everyone. My name is Anastasiia Medianovska, and I would like to take with you a journey to corporate governance world today. So, Walmart, Toyota, State Grid, Apple, what do these companies have in common? They're enormous. The biggest companies in the world, with more than 200 billion in revenues, hundreds of thousands of employees, shareholders, and other interested persons. How do these giants and all other big corporations manage to work efficiently? My answer is corporate governance. It is a glue that ties all the persons involved in the same business, because its main goal is to align interests of shareholders, management, employees, society, and so on. And this particular approach in organizing businesses and processes has facilitated investors' lives and helped to spread investment activity globally. But corporate governance is like health. We do not talk much about it when it's good, but it is on everyone's lips when something goes wrong. Many well-known scandals have its roots in corporate governance, like Wells Fargo, Toshiba, FIFA, and Enron. And the failures of corporate governance are always followed by shareholders being angry and share price declines. Imagine that mistake of one person in big corporation might mean thousands of people losing jobs and investors losing billions of dollars. Good corporate governance may help, and you may ask me, what is a good corporate governance? Is it internal rules or corporate law or maybe penalties? Do you think that one person in jail can make it up to hundreds of shareholders wanting revenge? If you look further, the appropriate motivation and right distribution of powers is the basis which helps to prevent the mistakes. However, motivation and powers is something intangible and tailor-made for each company. It's like you cannot compare corporate governance at Nestle with their classical Swiss model with Berkshire Hathaway, where one person is CEO, major shareholder, and chairman, but both companies are doing good. Therefore, you cannot enforce corporate governance as such, but rather define principle, best practices, and organizational model. At the very end, goals of corporate governance are the same for every country, industry, and organization. It is to make everyone equally happy. And even though corporate governance is regarded as a pure finance concept, it can be used beyond the business world, because this is the language which can be understood by everyone, even if the story, especially when the story is bad. And it can be also applied to express many things. If you think about corporate governance at schools, churches, or even family, that would be a fresh view, but not necessarily a useless one. Because realizing one's role in any kind of social unit helps to identify the problems. Let me make you an example. A service provider with 20-year history has more than 90 billion in revenues and 20 billion in gross profit. Its business has good potential, but something goes wrong all the time. Its board is not really independent because most of its members are company suppliers for years. Its executive management is not professional because CHRO has never served in HR department and chief legal officer has never studied law. Managers are compensated poorly and their motivation has never been long-term. Compliance function doesn't do its job properly because they never criticize board or management. Company is very slow with innovations and has difficult times attracting and retaining talents. Shareholders feel that they have no powers to change the way it goes now. So half of them do not even come to shareholder meeting. Does anyone want to invest in such company? Knowing the consequences of corporate governance failure, none would like to. And what is interesting is that everyone in this room understands that, even if they have nothing to do with finance. But you can also imagine that most of us are already shareholders of this company. Us and other 40 million people around that cannot sell it off because this hypothetical company is our country and we are its shareholders to some extent. Many people say there is no comparison between private and public sector and non-profit organization, but I'm the kind of person who is telling that corporate governance stories to my family and friends, and I can see that it really works. My father started using motivational tips to my sister. My aunt changed her attitude to politics, and my grandmother started asking her priest where the church spent all the donations. So with a bit of imagination, you can see many situations from corporate governance point of view. At the very end, a proper mindset is equally important for companies, organizations, countries, and even day-to-day life. And I wish that everyone can learn this language of corporate governance, because it may help shareholders of any country, organization, and any type of social unit realize their roles, claim their rights, and use their powers. I think that future of finance is finance for everyone. It's not always about formulas, not about exchange rate or valuation model. It's about our views. And future of finance is not anymore possible without bilateral development of finance professionals and overall society. Society should learn from finance, and finance should learn from society. Why not to start with corporate governance? Thank you.
And our next participant is Sergei Mochtchenkov with a speech topic, Becoming More Human to Face the Future of Artificial Intelligence.
Hello, everyone. This is probably the most fun I'm going to have this year, so thank you. I'm going to talk to you about how we can prepare as human financial analysts to the coming of artificial intelligence into our industry. Now, I gave it a lot of thought, and I realized, well, we can face the future either as growth investors by embracing it, or we can face the future as value investors by trying to find certain capabilities that we as humans have that has the greatest economic moat as compared to artificial intelligence. And I came up with 4 strategies that we can actually apply, partially with the help of Jack Ma of Alibaba, that said that our core advantage is the wisdom of the human heart, which is empathy. So here's how we can use it in the investing process. The first strategy comes from the book by Peter Lynch, One Up on Wall Street. In that great book, Peter Lynch says that we can achieve an investing advantage if we invest into the companies that produce the products that we use and love ourselves. Now, that is a huge advantage that we humans have because artificial intelligence cannot try out the beds in Hilton Hotel to see if they're comfortable. It cannot taste a new burger from McDonald's. It cannot watch a new advertising campaign to see if it catches your emotions. So that's one of the core competencies that we have as humans. Now, it's not as easy as going shopping more, of course, though it requires that. You also need to be able to test products from the point of view of different consumer groups. Will children like this? Will Japanese like this? Will Italians? And so on. So you need to really develop that empathy that you have that I believe in India they call a great soul. Now, a second strategy is to become a better evaluator of corporate culture. Now, we all know how important corporate culture is for company profitability and durability if hard times hit, but we don't really know what it is, let alone we cannot quantify it. So artificial intelligence will not be able to surpass us there. Now, one way to do it is to when you go visiting a business, try to see if are people happy here. Do they find meaning? Is it a company where you want to work? Now that is crucial, but again, only humans can do it. A third strategy actually is the comprehension of stories. Now, I believe artificial intelligence is at a grade 4 level right now when it comes to general comprehension of written language and such. I'm personally a big fan of net investing of Benjamin Graham, and I do a lot of that. And in it, you really need to get into the story behind the company and why did it come to this situation and what's going on underneath. You got to read between the lines. Is there some kind of conflict? Is there a struggle for power? What's the human drama that's going on underneath the covers? It's really interesting, and I believe that in that competency, AI will not reach us for a long while. And the fourth final strategy is to use your empathy to forecast the outcome and risk of game theory situations. I got that strategy actually from the book by Howard Marks, The Most Important Thing. Howard is also a CFA charter holder, so that got my attention. In that book, he says that computers will not be able to assess risk properly. And it's primarily because a computer creates a quantitative model of risk. Say there is a 10% risk of something. But how can you ever test it to be true? After the event happens, how do you know if it was a 10% risk or a 20 or a 30? There's no feedback loop, and the hypothesis is not testable because only one thing happens. So it's like the joke, what's the odds of seeing a dinosaur on the street? Well, it's 50-50. Either you see it or you don't. Now, let's take the current situation of North Korea, for instance. The ex-director of CIA said that there is a 25% chance of an armed conflict between USA and North Korea. Doesn't seem to be a professional forecast to me. But if I apply my empathy, I realize, well, the only reason North Korea would push the situation to the brink of war if it was different army factions inside North Korea that controlled the nuclear capabilities. So let's say Air Force has the delivery system, someone else has the materials, someone has the research departments. And so they need the situation to be as close to conflict as possible to stay united at home. So to me, there is no risk of war. There is simply a stable situation, as a certain Nash equilibrium, as late Dr. Thomas Schelling would call it. I'm a big fan. So even though I may be wrong and the situation may escalate or de-escalate, it's a testable hypothesis and it's a model that can be improved upon. So I hope you all will grow your empathy and face artificial intelligence with bravery. Thank you so much.
Oleksandr Pryndiuk with the topic Fintech Challenge for Banks. Alex, please welcome.
Can I use this? Okay. Oh, it works. So, hello everyone. I'm Alex, and it's a real pleasure for me to stand and talk in front of you today. So, the future of finance is a fairly wide thing with many different angles to explore, and frankly, in the beginning, it was hard to figure out what I want to talk about. And I just wanted to get a bit of inspiration, perhaps as everyone does who sits here today. And what is the best way to do this? For me, it's talk to people. So I started talking to people about the future of finance. And I talked to my friends around the world. I talked to my family, to my manager, to my colleagues in Ukraine, London, New York. I also talked to strangers in planes. And I also had a chance to talk to a professor from Chicago Booth Business Schools and student there. And you know what? I was so excited to hear so many interesting ideas about topics like cashless economy, trends in wealth and asset management, technology advancements, blockchain, etc. And I also remember how my mom was defending cashless economy, saying it's going to make the life of bad guys who do bad things like terrorism financing or drug selling much harder. Yes, we know these things, but I was amazed to hear it was the first thing that came up to my mom's mind. So, a lot of interesting ideas around. And from that variety of topics I discussed, I somehow felt, perhaps because I'm a strong supporter of innovations, that I would like to talk about a breakthrough of fintech, and specifically in a consumer business. It is changing the world of finance now, and it challenges traditional banks so hard. And this is happening right now. So that is why I decided to talk today about a rapidly growing competition between fintech companies and traditional banks that is going to reshape the industry. So what is happening? Traditional banks, they have clients and scales, but the emerging fintech companies, they have better innovations. And I think that it's just a matter of time when fintech companies get their scales and only increase competition to banks. So let's just be on the same side of what fintech is. It's a technology company that aims to compete with traditional ways of delivering financial services. And modern technology means that fintech companies actually can go global overnight and compete in the big league. So they just find inefficiencies and opportunities on markets and fill the gaps quickly and efficiently. And investments in fintech, they have been increasing exponentially over the last couple of years. According to Citi Research, investments in fintech were around $2 billion in 2010, and they increased like 10 times, up to $20 billion in 2015. By estimations, around 70% of this investment they spent on personal business or B2C. And why actually fintech companies, they target this business segment? It's very easy. They're very good in providing client experience solutions. And they are very good in removing pain points, not adding them. So a big challenge for banks. Second, I also realized that fintech companies, in the majority of cases, they use infrastructure of traditional banks very significantly, very intensively. They do this indirectly, however, they cannot operate remotely from banks. And what do I mean here? Let's just look at PayPal or Apple Pay. These are fintech companies that work in transactions business, and they work with wireless money, which they get into their ecosystems actually from banks. And banks before that do a lot of preparatory work like KYC, IML, compliance checks, and all stuff like that. And fintech companies, they just remove this operational work from their business models, and they only provide the final product, which banks were a bit slow to create. So banks in their infrastructure have almost everything except that final product with excellent client experience. And fintech companies, in contrast, they have almost nothing but that final product. So it looks like fintech companies, they just picking up a cherry from bank's pie, and looks like a good business strategy, doesn't it? And finally, what do banks do about fintech, and are they doing enough? Banks are not blind. It's good. They see this coming of fintech, and they invest in fintech companies a lot, and they try to integrate their solutions into their architecture, and this is good. According to Talent, a research firm, investments in IT infrastructure of global banks were around $200 billion in 2015, and that's a lot. That's like 10 times more than investments in fintech. However, there is a problem with these huge investments. Around 70% of them were spent on the maintenance of existing infrastructure and systems, which are significantly outdated comparing to what fintech is offering. So, due to these inefficiencies, maybe banks should consider to completely rebuild their IT infrastructure. I think they should. So, technology is coming, and I believe it's really up to banks how much technology element they add to their business models in order to stay competitive in long run. Because we've seen how digital disruption changed fundamentally a lot of industries like music sales, newspapers, taxi, traveling, and it's up to banks how they see the next chapter of banking life. That's all about the competition between fintech companies and traditional banks for today. And you know what? this evolving competition is just a small piece of what is happening in today's finances. And it's a real joy that the industry we all work in is driven by innovations and progress. So thank you for your attention. Thank you, CFA Society Ukraine, for organizing this great event. And also, thank you for the opportunity to do my first public speaking in my entire life. Thanks.